A 12-year-old girl walks into a motorcycle club and says something that freezes everyone in place. A stranger at the park. A camera always pointed the wrong way. What the bikers discover next will challenge everything they thought they knew about danger, loss, and the thin line between suspicion and desperation. Katie burst through the clubhouse door with her mother close behind, both out of breath. The girl's sneakers squeaked against the concrete floor as she stopped in front of the nearest table where 3 bikers sat nursing their coffee. Her chest heaved, not from running, but from the weight of what she'd seen. "There's a man at the park," she said, words tumbling out fast. "He pretends to photograph the motorcycles, but he's not. He's photographing the children." The room went quiet. Cards stopped shuffling. Conversations died mid-sentence. 8 men turned to look at the girl whose family had been coming to their events for years. They knew Katie. She wasn't the type to panic or exaggerate. If she said something was wrong, something was wrong. Stephen, the club president, set down his mug slowly. "You sure about this, kid?" Katie nodded, gripping her mother's hand tighter. "I watched him for 20 minutes. Every time he raised his phone toward the bikes, the camera was actually pointed at the playground. He did it 6 times. Her mother spoke up, voice strained. "I saw it too. He was sitting on the same bench he's been on for the past week. Same time, same position." The bikers exchanged glances. This wasn't their usual territory. Bar fights, road disputes, protecting their own. This was different. This touched something deeper, something that made their leather jackets feel heavier. Peter, the youngest member at 28, stood up. "We should see for ourselves before jumping to conclusions." They went that afternoon. 5 of them, bikes parked a careful distance from the playground. They watched the man arrive at exactly 4:15, just as Katie's mother said he would. Mid-40s, average build, nothing remarkable. He sat on the 3rd bench from the left, pulled out his phone, and began his performance. He angled the device toward the row of motorcycles gleaming in the late sun. But his eyes never followed the lens. They stayed fixed on the swings, the slides, the children climbing and laughing. When a mother walked past with a toddler, his thumb moved, the unmistakable gesture of someone taking a photo. Then he lowered the phone, checked the screen, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Stephen felt his jaw tighten. "You've got to be kidding me." "Wait," Peter interrupted. "Let's follow him first. See where this goes." They tracked him for 3 days. The pattern never changed. Park at 4:15, photograph until 5, leave without speaking to anyone. But they also followed him after. He didn't go to bars, didn't meet with anyone. He drove to different locations, another park across town, the playground behind Jefferson Elementary, the square near the community center. Always places where children gathered. Always the same careful distance. Always alone. On the 4th day, Stephen called a contact in the police department. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. But when he hung up, his expression had shifted from anger to something more complicated. "His name's on a watch list," Stephen told the others back at the clubhouse. 2 states. No arrests, no charges. Just reports. Same description every time. Suspicious man photographing children. "So why isn't he locked up?" someone asked. "Because watching isn't illegal. Being creepy isn't illegal. Until he does something, then we make sure he doesn't get the chance." Another member interrupted, fists already clenched. But Peter shook his head. "Or we find out what he's actually doing." The room erupted in disagreement. Half wanted to run him off immediately, put the fear of God and Chrome into him. The other half, led by Peter, argued for caution. What if they were wrong? What if there was more to the story? Stephen raised his hand, silencing everyone. "We do this smart. Peter, you wanted to talk to him? Tomorrow. You get 1 conversation. After that, we decide together." That night, Peter couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the man's face in those moments at the park. Not predatory, not calculating. Something else. Something that looked almost like grief. He'd seen that expression before, in mirrors and in the faces of brothers who'd lost people they couldn't get back. The next afternoon, Peter walked into the park alone. No leather jacket, no visible club colors. Just jeans and a plain shirt. He sat down on the bench beside the stranger, close enough to matter, far enough not to threaten. Silence settled between them like dust. The man looked at him finally, recognition flickering in his eyes. You're one of them. The motorcycles. Yeah. Are you here to hurt me? Peter studied him carefully. That depends on what you tell me in the next 5 minutes. The man's hands trembled slightly as he set his phone on the bench between them. My name is George, he said quietly. And I know exactly how this looks. George didn't look away. Exhaustion had carved itself into his features, the weight of 6 years visible in every line. Peter waited, letting the silence stretch between them while children's laughter echoed from the playground behind. 6 years ago, my son disappeared, George began, his voice barely above a whisper. Andy. He was 7 years old. It was a Sunday afternoon in May. I went inside to grab us sandwiches. When I came back out, the yard was empty. Peter felt the urge to interrupt, to demand details, but George's voice held him still. The police came within 10 minutes. Search parties formed by evening. His face was on every news channel for 2 weeks. They questioned me, my ex-wife, the neighbors, everyone. They searched the woods behind our house, dragged the pond 3 miles away, checked traffic cameras on every road within a 50-mile radius. George's hands clenched into fists. Nothing. One moment he existed. The next he didn't. A young mother pushed a stroller past them. George's eyes followed automatically, then snapped back to Peter as if caught doing something shameful. After 8 months, the detective told me they were scaling back the investigation. Not closing it, just moving on. They had other cases, newer cases. Andy became a file in a cabinet somewhere. His voice cracked. But he's my son. How do you move on from that? Peter leaned back against the bench. You don't. No, you don't. George pulled his phone from his pocket, unlocked it with shaking fingers, and opened his photo gallery. Hundreds of images scrolled past. Children at parks, walking home from school, playing in yards. None of them Andy. At first, I just drove around. Different towns, different states. Looking at playgrounds, hoping maybe someone had taken him and he was out there somewhere. Still alive, still growing up. He stopped on one photo. A boy about 13 with dark hair and a bright smile. I started taking pictures about 3 years ago. This kid, the way he ran, it reminded me so much of Andy. The way his arms pumped when he moved, you know? So I took a photo to look at later, to compare with the only picture I have left of my son. George swiped to another app and pulled up a single image. A 7-year-old boy with a crooked smile and a small scar on his left wrist. This is the last photo taken of Andy, the morning he disappeared. I study it every night. The shape of his face, his expressions, trying to imagine how he'd look now at 13. Sometimes I see him in other kids. The angle of a jaw. The way someone laughs. It's probably crazy. It's not crazy, Peter said quietly. It's desperate. There's a difference. Is there? George's eyes finally met his. I know what people see when they look at me. I know what I've become. The police have questioned me twice in the last year alone. Different cities, same reason. Someone reported a strange man taking photos of kids. I tried to explain, but how do you explain this without sounding exactly like what they're afraid of? Peter thought about the conversation back at the clubhouse, the anger, the immediate assumption of guilt. He thought about Katie's frightened face and her mother's protective stance. George wasn't wrong about how he appeared. Why don't you stop? Peter asked. I did. Twice. George's laugh was bitter. Each time lasted about a month. Then I'd be driving past a school and see a boy with dark hair getting on a bus. And I'd think, what if that's him? What if I just drove away from my own son because I was too afraid of what strangers might think? So I'd start again. Take one photo. Then another. And another. A soccer ball rolled toward their bench. A girl about 9 ran over to retrieve it, glancing nervously at the two men. George immediately looked down at his hands, making himself smaller. The girl grabbed her ball and hurried back to her friends. That's why I sit far away now, George said. Why I don't ever approach them or speak to them. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm just here because I don't know where else to look. Peter watched him carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this story was a cover for something darker. But all he saw was a broken man clinging to the thinnest thread of hope. The police told you he's probably dead. Yes. They told me that in year 2, said I should accept it and try to move forward. George's jaw tightened. But they never found a body. Never found evidence of what happened. Just nothing. And as long as there's nothing, there's possibility. Maybe that makes me delusional, but it's all I have. Peter pulled out his own phone. What he was about to do would make everything change. He just didn't know in which direction. Send me that photo of Andy. The one from the morning he disappeared. George stared at him. Why? Because you're right about one thing, you can't keep searching like this. But maybe you don't have to search alone anymore. The clubhouse meeting that night lasted 3 hours. Peter stood at the front, George's story laid out like evidence at a trial. Some members remained skeptical. Years of dealing with liars had taught them to question everything. Others saw what Peter saw. A father trapped in an impossible situation, doing the only thing he could think of to keep searching. Stephen finally broke the stalemate. We vote. Help him search the right way, or tell him to stop and move on. Show of hands. More hands went up than stayed down. Not everyone agreed, but enough did. Then we do this smart, Stephen said, looking directly at George, who sat quietly in the corner. No more parks. No more photos of random kids. You give us that picture of Andy, and we spread it through our network. We know people in places the police never think to look. George's voice was hoarse. Why would you do this for me? Because we know what it's like to search for something that might not exist, Peter answered. And because you need help. They started small. Each club member took a copy of Andy's photo. Some printed, some digital. They didn't make a spectacle of it, didn't plaster telephone poles or organize press conferences. Instead, they rode their regular routes and asked quiet questions. Gas station attendants, diner waitresses, mechanics in small-town shops who'd been fixing bikes since before the internet existed. Most people looked at the photo, shook their heads and went back to their work. But a few lingered, studied the image longer than necessary, said things like maybe or there was a kid a few years back before trailing off into uncertainty. George stopped going to the park entirely. On weekends, he rode with the club, wearing a borrowed leather vest that felt strange across his shoulders. The other members taught him hand signals, road etiquette, the unspoken language of riders who trusted each other with their lives at 70 miles per hour. George discovered he was learning to share the weight of his grief. Katie and her mother joined several of the rides. The girl had appointed herself an unofficial investigator, her sharp eyes scanning faces in every town they passed through. She carried her own copy of Andy's photo in her jacket pocket, showing it to other kids at rest stops, asking if they'd seen him. Most hadn't, but Katie never stopped asking. Weeks passed before anyone remembered seeing a face like Andy's. An elderly man at a farmer's market in a town called Millbrook studied the photo for nearly a minute before speaking. There was a boy looked like this maybe 4 years ago. Saw him at the feed store with a man I didn't recognize. Thought it was odd because the man kept calling him by different names. First Michael, then something else. Kids seemed confused. Stephen took down every detail. The feed store had closed 2 years prior, but they tracked down the former owner. He remembered the incident vaguely but couldn't provide anything concrete. Still, it was more than they'd had before. It was possibility. The second lead came from an unexpected source. One of the club members knew someone who worked with deactivated shelter records, places that had closed down due to funding cuts or mismanagement. Buried in the files of a shelter 3 states over was a note from 6 years ago. Unidentified boy, approximately 7 years old, brought in with fever and minor injuries. No ID, no missing person reports matching his description in that region. Released after 4 days to someone claiming to be a relative. George's hands shook when he read the report. The timing matches. 2 weeks after Andy disappeared. Could be coincidence, Stephen warned. Could be a different kid entirely. Or it could be him. They made copies of the report, added it to their growing file. The search had structure now, direction. Every weekend meant new roads, new towns, new questions. George learned the rhythm of it. The long stretches of highway where hope and doubt battled in his chest. The moments of connection when someone actually stopped to help. The crushing disappointment when leads evaporated like morning fog. As summer deepened, they planned their longest ride yet. Days on the road through a neighboring state. hitting smaller towns the police databases had likely overlooked. Katie convinced her mother to let her join, arguing that kids notice things adults missed. The group rolled out on a Friday morning, 12 bikes strong, Andy's photo in every pocket. They stopped for gas in a town so small it barely registered on maps. The station looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, single pump, handwritten price signs, an attendant who moved with the careful slowness of someone past retirement age. Peter showed him the photo out of habit, expecting another dead end. The old man held it close to his face, squinting. Then his expression shifted. "Ha! You recognize him?" Peter's heart rate kicked up. "Maybe. There's a boy helps out at the elementary school couple blocks from here. Does odd jobs, yard work. I see him sometimes when I drive past." The attendant handed back the photo. "Something about the eyes reminded me of him, is all. Could be nothing." Peter texted the group immediately. Within 20 minutes, George pulled up on his bike, face pale with anticipation and terror. Katie and her mother arrived minutes later. They stood in the gas station parking lot, a strange assembly of leather and denim and desperate hope. "The school's that way," the attendant pointed. "Can't miss it. Old brick building with a blue roof." They walked the 2 blocks together, nobody speaking. George's breathing was audible, sharp, and irregular. When the school came into view, weathered and tired looking against the afternoon sky, he stopped completely. "What if it's not him?" His voice broke. "What if I get close and it's just another kid who happens to look similar?" Peter put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we keep looking." "But George, what if it is him?" They moved forward as a group, engines silent behind them, hope carried on shoulders that had learned to bear much heavier weights. The schoolyard held one figure. A boy pushed a broom across cracked pavement, gathering fallen leaves into small piles. He wore jeans too short at the ankles, dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked. George, Peter, Katie, and her mother moved closer, their footsteps quiet on the dusty ground. The boy didn't notice them at first. He tilted his head slightly when a bird called from a nearby tree, and George's breath caught audibly. Andy used to do that, pause and listen to birds like he was trying to decode their language. Peter noticed it at the same moment George did. When the boy reached up to wipe sweat from his forehead, his left sleeve pulled back, revealing a thin white scar across his wrist. The exact scar described in the missing person report, from a bicycle accident the summer before Andy disappeared. George moved forward, then stumbled. His legs nearly gave out. Peter caught his arm, steadying him. The boy finally looked up, noticing the strangers. He looked curious, cautious. The broom leaned against the wall. "Can I help you folks?" His voice had the flat accent of someone who'd grown up in this region. Nothing like the slight southern lilt Andy had inherited from George's ex-wife. George opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He tried again. "Is your name Andy?" The boy frowned. "No, sir. My name's Marty." The words landed wrong. George's face crumpled, and for a moment it seemed like 6 years of searching had just collapsed into this single, devastating mistake. They'd found the wrong boy in the wrong place. The school door opened. A woman in her 50s rushed out, alarm written across her weathered face. She took in the scene quickly. Motorcycles in the distance. Strangers surrounding the boy. A man whose face showed everything. "What's going on here?" "Marty, come inside." "Wait," Peter said, palms up. "Please, we're not here to cause trouble. We're looking for a missing child, and we thought—" "You thought wrong." The woman stepped between them and the boy. But then she saw George's face, really saw it, and something in her expression softened slightly. "You're the father?" George could only nod. She looked at the boy, then back at George, and her shoulders sagged as if a weight she'd been carrying for years had suddenly become unbearable. "You should come inside. All of you." The school office was cramped and outdated, filled with filing cabinets. Nobody sat. Marty stood near the window watching the bikers. Katie stayed close, smiling. "My name is Helen," the woman began, her voice tired. "I work here as a custodian and assistant. Marty helps me after school." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I found him 6 years ago at the bus station in Crawford, west of here. He was alone, burning with fever, had bruises on his arms and that cut on his wrist. He was terrified, disoriented. Kept saying he couldn't remember how he got there. George's knees finally buckled. Peter guided him into a chair. I took him to the clinic, Helen continued. Fever, wound, basic questions. He either couldn't answer or wouldn't. She shook her head. I called the police. They checked missing children reports in the surrounding counties, but nothing matched. No one was looking for a boy in Crawford. Because we were looking 3 states away, George said hoarsely. That's where he disappeared. Helen nodded slowly. I kept him at my house. He was terrified of the system. After a few weeks, he asked to stay. Said he felt safe. I know I should have pushed harder, done more, but I was lonely, and he needed someone, and Her voice broke. I convinced myself no one was looking anymore, that whoever had him before had abandoned him at that station. Why Marty? Peter asked. He chose it himself. Couldn't remember his real name. Wanted a fresh start. Stephen, who'd been making calls from the doorway, stepped forward. Police are on their way. They'll need to verify everything, run DNA tests. The boy, Andy, Marty, whoever he was, finally spoke. I remember flashes. A yard. Someone calling me something else. Being scared. Then a car that smelled like cigarettes. He looked at George. Were you my father? I am your father. George stood on shaking legs. Your name was Andy. You loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli. You had a stuffed dog named Captain that you took everywhere. The scar on your wrist. You got it falling off your bike, trying to jump a ramp you'd built with scrap wood. Something flickered in the boy's eyes. A shadow of memory, uncertain and fragile. A stuffed dog. Gray fur, floppy ears, missing one eye. You cried when we left him at a rest stop. I drove back to find him. Marty's hand moved unconsciously to his wrist, tracing the scar. Sometimes I dream about a dog, and someone singing off-key. He looked up. Do you sing? George laughed through tears. Terribly. Your mother used to beg me to stop. Nobody moved. Katie stepped forward, with the easy confidence of someone too young to be afraid of saying the wrong thing. What do you want us to call you? She asked simply. Andy? Marty? Something else. The boy considered this, looking between George and Helen, the father who'd lost him and the woman who'd saved him. I don't know yet. Can I figure that out while I get to know him? He gestured toward George. Yeah, Katie said. You can do whatever you want. It's your name. Marty smiled slightly, and George saw Andy in that crooked grin. Older, changed, but unmistakably his son. Want to see the garden I've been working on? It's out back. Katie brightened. Definitely. The 2 kids headed toward the door, already talking. The adults stayed behind. Helen wiped her eyes. George couldn't stop staring after the boy. Peter felt the peculiar satisfaction of a puzzle finally clicking into place. When the police arrived, there would be procedures, paperwork, investigations into what happened during those missing weeks 6 years ago. There would be DNA tests and custody arrangements and therapy sessions. The road ahead was long and uncertain. But George knew something he hadn't known 6 years ago, or even 6 hours ago. His son was alive. Changed, yes. Carrying scars both visible and hidden. But alive. And this time, the ending wasn't about possession or legal rights. It was about a boy choosing his own path forward, in his own time, with people who loved him on both sides. Outside, Katie's voice drifted through the window, asking Marty about his favorite subject in school. The boy's answer was lost in the afternoon breeze, but his tone was lighter, more animated. George closed his eyes and listened to his son's voice. Different from memory but unmistakably real. The bikers waited in the parking lot, engines silent, understanding without being told that some moments required patience. They'd ridden thousands of miles searching for an ending. What they'd found instead was a beginning, messy, complicated, and more hopeful than any of them had dared to imagine. George spent 6 years looking through a lens, trying to find his son in the faces of strangers. In the end, he found him, but not in the way he expected. What would you do if hope was the only thing left? Share your thoughts below. If this story moved you, like and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that remind us what really matters. See you in our next video.